Okay, so we're continuing on lesson 25, and we're going to go over the measures of central tendency. The measures of central tendency we all know is mean, median, and mode. So let's quickly define those. The mean is simply the average, right? And we find that by adding them all together and then dividing, right? And dividing by the total number in the set. Total numbers in list or set. Okay, then we have the median. The median is simply defined as the middle. And as a side note, we need to have them in order. Okay, and if there's two in the middle, then we have to average them, so don't forget about that. Then we have the mode. That one's the easiest. Oops, where did it spell? The mode is the one that occurs the most, so we will see that one the most. So mode is most, and that's up on my wall. Here's the hey diddle diddle thing if you ever forget. So there's our definitions of all those. We're going to move on to example 1 for lesson 25. Okay, it gives us this list of numbers: 18, 15, 20, 16, 17, 19, and 19. So I'm going to show you a few more things on the calculator that might help us with this data set. Let's turn it on, clear it out, get to our home page, and we need to go to Stat. In order to clear the list that we currently have in there, because we have 2 lists already in there, I can do this by going over here to Clear List. I can clear the list, select the list that I want to clear. I want to clear list 1 and I want to clear list 2. So I'm clearing both of those lists. It's done now. So go back to my stat, hit edit, and there they are. They're all clear. So I'm going to enter in all of the numbers that I just had. So 18, 15, 20, 16, 17, 19, and 19. So it has everything in the data set. I should have 7 numbers. I'm going to count them up real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I put them all in. I didn't accidentally skip one. Now there's another neat feature on here. If you hit stat one more time, you can sort it right there. So we're going to sort A. So sort A, select the list that we want to sort, close that parentheses. That's list 1. Press enter, it'll say done. If you keep hitting enter, it'll keep saying done, but it did it the first time. You don't have to do it multiple times. Hit stat, and then go back and we can look at our list now that it's in order: 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we have doubles of that 19, which is good. And I can find my median really quickly from this. So I notice get rid of the 15 and the 20, 16 and the 19, 17 and the other 19, leaves my 18 as my middle. Okay, so my median would be 18 for this data set. So median was 18. Now I want to find my mode, one that occurs the most. Now if there's more than one, you can write down more than one, but in this case there's only 19. Now if we had another 20 in the data set, we would say 19 and 20, but in this data set, mode is really simple. It's just 19. And then median is the one that people will struggle with, and it's not because it's difficult, it's because they forget to add a number. So let's take that element of error there, and we'll just ensure that all of our numbers are in our list. Do a quick calculation, go over to calc, one variable statistics, hit in list 1, and press enter, and look right here. There's our average, 17.7 blah 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 blah, right there. Okay, and that should clear everything up on our median. Okay, so we have our median, and I'm going to write this as an approximation. I'm going to round it to hundredths, so it's 17.71. Okay, so I have all of my measures of central tendency now. If I wanted to do that as long form, I would have added all of these numbers up, set them equal to whatever it was, and then divided it by 7. So total divided by 7 is what it would have been if we have to do that long form. Okay. And if you forget how many you have, it also gives it to you right there. Okay, so let's move on from here. Measures of dispersion is a statistic that indicates how spread out or how far apart they are in the data value. So there's 3 different measures for that. We call the first one the range. And we should know the range as the difference. So keeping in mind it's the biggest minus smallest, right? Okay, so there's the range. Then we'll have another one called the variance. Now that's a new one for most of us. So the variance of the data is the average. The average of the squared differences. Of the squared differences. And then we'll see the standard deviation. Now, in our book, it'll be using this sign, which is actually sigma, and I think I previously accidentally called it theta. And this is a sigma symbol, and the full-blown definition of it is kind of long, but it says it's a measure on average of how far from the mean the data values are. So if we're looking at it as a bell-shaped curve, which is normally how we will see standard deviation, it'll go up and down like this, and somewhere in here tends to be the mean or the median. There's some measure of central tendency is going to be right around the top of that point. Okay, so standard bell-shaped curve kind of trickles off, and there's no skewing one way or left or right. Okay, and then the standard deviation is just a point that is so far away from that middle. Okay, and then the second part would be another standard deviation away, and then the third one will be again another standard deviation away. So this is how all of our testing data go into play. They kind of averages off, put the average in the middle, and then they say if you're above average, you're on this side. If you're below average, you're on that side. So 50% of the data is there, and 50% of the data is up here. So we'll start figuring out what percentages go where and how to do that. So the long definition for standard deviation looks like this. Sigma equals the square root, and it's a long square root, the difference of your data points. Okay, so each data point subtracted from your average. So I'm going to erase that too. Subtracted from your average, and then they square it. Then they add it to the next data point, subtracted from your average, and then they square it. Then they add it to your next data point and subtract it from your average and square it. And they add it to the next one. And then they finally do it to the very last one, and they subtract it from the average and square it. And then they add all of those up, and then they divide it by the total number of terms. So if we were going to do this long form, which we're not going to, you would take each individual point, subtract it from the average, square it. So if there were 30 numbers in your data set, you would have to do that 30 times and then square root the division that you would end up with. Okay, so it's really long and drawn out, and we're not going to have to do that in the long drawn out form. So if you have your calculator already on, go into your list. Okay, go edit your list, input in the data from this list, 5, 7, 12, 14, and 17 from example 2. Okay, 5, 7, 12, 14, and 17. This is example 2. Okay, so we're in stat. If you didn't already get there, go over to edit and then enter in that data, and then you can get out of it, and I'll show you the rest here in a second. Okay, it's 5, 7, 12, 14, 17. 5, 7, 12, 14, and 17. Okay, after we get to that point, we're going to go over to calc. We're going to calculate our one variable statistics. So one variable statistics, and if you only have one list inputted, you can just press enter again. But if you have more than one list, of course you have to select what list you put in there and then press enter. And again, your one variable statistics pop up. So we're going to write down everything, even though the example one doesn't ask us for that. So the median would be the middle, and we can only do this from our data list. So I would go back to my data list, I'd look at these, go, okay, they're not in order, so I need to order them. So I'll hit stat again, sort A, order that list 1, order. So again, what am I doing here? Okay, it's not going to let me do it that long way. So anyway, sort that list. It's done. Go back to it and find your middle. So we cancel 5, the 17, the 7, the 14. We're left with 12. So the median is 12. Now a short list, that's really easy to do. You can look at it really quickly and find your middle. Now the mode, is there a mode? No mode. So just write none on mode. So we got the mean that we need to find. So if we go back to our screen, our home screen here, just second quit and go back to our home screen, we should be able to see it. But if it won't let you tab it, just redo your one variable statistics. What is what here? It's the 11 at the top. Yeah. So remember that the mean is x bar, it's that bar above it, and that in this case it was 11. Okay. Then the next thing we're going to start, these are the measures of central tendency. This is central tendency. Now we're looking at measures of dispersion for the next one. So dispersion is the 3 that we just listed above. So we're going to find our standard deviation, our sigma. Okay, so our standard deviation here is that 4.427188724. I'm going to give an approximation for this, so I'm going to change my equal sign to an approximation. I'll round it to the hundredths, 4.43. Okay, and in order to find our variance, there's something else that we have to do to find variance. You actually have to multiply that out, and I'll show you that here in a second. Okay, but does everybody know where to find standard deviation? Anybody confused on that? Okay. So the second example is the example B. Now I can input that list into the second list, or I can just replace the old list. I'm going to replace the old list. So it has 10, 12, 7, 11, 20, 7 again, 6, and 8, and 9. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I have the right number in there. That says there should be 9. I'm going to count them up real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I got them all in there. I'm going to sort that list. I want to sort that list as fast as I can. And guys, instead of going to stat every time and then selecting the list, or sorry, second list every time, you can just hit second 1 and it'll put in L1. If you notice that in blue right there. And then just close your parentheses, press enter. It says done. Go back to your stat list. Go to calc and calculate that statistic. Pops up. The mean, you don't have to write it out as mean every time. If you want to just write x bar, that'll be fine. That way you can get used to it. So there's my mean. Our mode, keep wanting to misspell that. Our mode, the one that occurs the most. So I see 7 in there. Are there any other modes we need to consider? I don't think so. If I want to double check my list, I can go into edit and see if there's any copies as I roll through them. Okay. If I don't see another one, I want to go to my median, find my middle. Okay, the quick way that I know where to find my median, if I have several numbers on my data set, I take the number that I have, 9, I add 1, divide it by 2, which would give me 5. That only works if you're odd, okay? So if you're odd, you can just count 5 back or 5 forward, it doesn't matter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my middle is 9. Now that, again, that only works if it's odd. If it's an even number, you have to look at the 2 middle numbers. So if it's even, you divide it by 2 and take that number and the next number. So if it were a 10 number set, divide it by 2, you'd take 5 and 6. Okay. So going back to our stat list. If it's a 4 number one, you'd have to take 2 and 3. You'd take 4, divide it by 2, and it gives you 2. So you have to take 2 and 3, the second and third list, number in the list, and you would average them. Because if it's an even amount of numbers, you have 2. Well, I don't know what the numbers would be in your list. Okay, so if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, as on its data set, my median would be 2.5, because I'd average the middle. Yes. Alrighty, I need to write down, that's my central tendency. Now I need to write my standard deviation. So going back, I see that my standard deviation was 4 exactly. You don't get to see that very often. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Example 3, and you're going to see several of them like this, so be ready for them. It says examine the effects of an outlier on your data set. So in this data set, it gives us, I'm going to go ahead and put this in my stat list already. It gives us 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 6, and then 68. Now it's a pretty obvious outlier. 68 is a pretty obvious outlier that is right there. So it says to notice the effects on your data for your outliers. So we're going to do first our measures of central tendency, our mean, median, mode, and then we want to look at our, let's see, effects on, identify the outlier in this data set, and then find the mean, median, mode, and range, and standard deviation. So we're going to find the standard deviation. Standard deviation. So in order to find the mean, hit stat. I hit stat, go over to calc, one variable statistics. Boom, it pops it all out for me. The mean is 10.6, 10 2/3 basically. So the mean, I'm going to write it down as the whole number, so 10 2/3, or sorry, as a entire number. Then I'm going to find my range that subtracts the biggest one from the smallest one. 68 minus 2 is 66. I want to find my median. That's the middle number. I had 9 numbers, so it's going to be my 5th one, which is 4. The one that occurs the most is also 4. Now look at the difference in your measures of central tendency. We have 4, 4, and then 10 2/3. So that already gives you an indication as to what that outlier did to my data set. And then I want to find my standard deviation. 20.30, I'm going to put it to the 100, so 20.3 approximately. And then it says, notice that the effects on the outlier. So then I have to redo all this information without my outlier. Go back to your stat list, go to edit, and delete the very last number. So just delete it, and then do all of your stuff again. So I'm just going to put commas. I put my original data, and then I'm going to put my second data right next to it, so I can see it right by side by side. So again, go to stat, calc, one variable statistics. Notice how far my median dropped down to 3.5. Go down to 3.5. And then my new median is going to change as well, because now I only have 8 numbers. So I divide that by 2. I have 4. Now I'm looking at my 4th and 5th number in the data set. So my 4th and 5th number is 3 and 4. So the average of 3 and 4 is 3.5. The one that occurs the most is still 4. That didn't change. And then our range changes greatly, because 6 minus 2 makes only 4. And then my standard deviation, again, that will change greatly. 1.22 approximately. And then I just talk about it. I'd say how much more one changed versus the other. Okay? Any questions there? Good figure. Okay, on a box and whisker plot, if you ever have to make one, you'll use all of the data that is on this bit down there. So box and whisker plots with the use of a calculator are really quick. So I'm going to use the data that we just used to make a box and whisker plot really fast. Okay, so this is our minimum. The first thing you'll see is the minimum. The next thing you'll see is quartile 1. Next you'll see is median. The next you'll see is quartile 3. And then you'll see your max. So if we use the data that we just had, and we get all of these numbers, the minimum was 2, quartile 1 was 2.5, the median was 3.5, the quartile 3 was 4, and our max was 6 from that data set without the outlier. Okay, with the outlier, this side would have been extended greatly. And if I wanted to plot this data point like with the outlier, so I'm going to throw a little break in here, that would be 68, and then I just circle it because we didn't use that number in our data set. Okay, that's really all you need for this lesson.